In the autumn of 1801, a young man who had impressed a member of the government was invited to play the violin at a solemn pontifical mass in the old Tuscan town of Lucca. The story is told in the state archives by Abbe Jacopo Cellini, a member of the cathedral orchestra. It fell to a young Genoese Jacobin, known as a patriot, and more especially as a violinist, to play at the Mass. The government wished this excellent violinist to exhibit his musical ability. But since there was to be a motet at the Epistle and a concerto at the offertory, there was no opportunity for him to play during the celebration of the Mass. And so the Minister of the Interior, Adriano Mencarelli, gave orders which were contrary to all the regulations that he should play at the end of the Kyrie, and he was indiscreet enough to play a concerto that took a good 28 minutes. This professor certainly manifested an unusual and unprecedented virtuosity. He imitated on his strings the songs of birds, the flute, trombone, and horn. And although everyone admired his astonishing bravura, when they heard this mimicry on the violin, it aroused laughter, even in the church. He was undoubtedly a professor of considerable ability, but he lacked judgment and self-criticism. Nevertheless, the concerto received great applause, the Jacobins leading the ovation. Such music had never before been heard at a Santa Croce celebration. The story foreshadowed much that was to come in the next 39 years. The professor, who with such notable indiscretion played a 28-minute concerto in the middle of a pontifical mass, was 19 years old at the time, and his career was to be full of just such dramatic surprises. He made it so, quite deliberately, and he suffered for it. But he was not to be distracted. He was possessed by his demon, and if ever there was an artist with an unshakable faith in his destiny, it was Niccolò Paganini. Paganini's faith in his destiny was based squarely on what he knew he could do, and he was to become soon the most successful instrumental soloist the world had ever known. But destiny had other things too in store for Niccolò Paganini, and the road turned out to be hard and painful. Showered with the greatest glory of any instrumentalist of his time or before him, he suffered, in almost equal and opposite measure, the devastating effects of continuing ill health, isolation, and other subtler wounds inflicted along the way. Among his miseries, Paganini was to witness his pursuit of glory and of money, robbing him slowly of almost everything else. As a performer, he went at first from strength to strength, as none had ever done before. But the composer lost valuable time, and the man watched his dreams of a happy life waste away and turn to ashes in his hands. But the 19-year-old, who caused such a stir in the church at Lucca, was determined to enjoy himself to the limits of his endurance and sometimes beyond, with music, with gambling, and with girls. With his whirlwind talent, he left the world gasping, and then watched with amusement how the world made the story its own. Legend after legend was invented, so that his public might more easily enjoy and explain the miracle Paganini. Paganini saw it all, used the legends, and fed them in every way that he could. At 19, his capacities seemed limitless, and he began to compose his 24 caprices, which alone have won him a place in history. But it was the performer, not the composer, who set out to conquer the world, and he was to succeed beyond anything that he or anyone else could ever have dreamed possible. He speaks in sounds with which he entices us or drives us away. He creates emotions and then destroys them with piercing strokes and tears. But when we want to turn away, full of resentment, he embraces our souls again with a golden line and threatens to draw them out of our bodies. Much of Paganini's meteoric flight was born on the wings of surprise. Surprise and fruitful contrast. This came in part from extraordinary contradictions within his own character, which the world was never to understand, and which led in turn to dramatic contradictions in how he was seen by others. Paganini learnt early to exploit this, to the delight or confusion, and sometimes the downright disgust of his public.
It was music such as the ear can never hear, music such as the heart alone can dream of.
He abuses his powers. He could play divinely, and sometimes does so for a minute or two, but then come his tricks and surprises, his Bowen convulsions, and his enharmonics like the mewling of an expiring cat.
With each new achievement, the conviction deepens that he is the greatest instrumentalist the world of music has ever known.
I can find no base for this column of flame and cloud. I can only say that I heard some meteoric sounds which I have not yet succeeded in interpreting.
The first time I heard him, he reminded me of Moses performing his tricks in the presence of the Egyptians. I found it irritating. The thing in him that captures and retains the attention to such a high degree is, perhaps, a certain mixture of the fantastic, a weird imagination, and a longing for liberty. He is not so much a lunatic as a poseur. His playing is like a musical hors d'oeuvre, a kind of prairie oyster which one swallows down with the aid of pepper and vinegar. O foolish world! O wondrous taste! O enthusiastic Viennese! I have never been so let down as by this so-called virtuoso. I cannot understand how, after hearing Romberg, Roder, Spohr, and Lafont, anyone can listen for one moment to such trickery. It was more like a twittering of sparrows than any legitimate musical sound.
Criticism served only to strengthen Paganini's resolve, and again he successfully transformed hostility into wild enthusiasm. So much so that in time this trick became an end in itself. From a very early age, he knew that he could surprise and hold his audience, and so with his violin he set out quite deliberately to dazzle the world. But he kept a more private affection for the guitar, and when the guitar appeared, the music was almost always sunnier, gentler, and more intimately revealing. Predictably, this gave rise to the tale that he used the guitar for his sexual conquests, of which there were many. Niccolo Paganini was born in Genoa, in the Passo di Gattamora, the Alley of the Black She-Cat, on the 27th of October, 1782. His father, Antonio, a Genoese dockworker who taught him first the mandolin and guitar, and later the violin. His father gave him also a passion for gambling that would cost him dear in his youth. When success came, he gave that up. But later, with a devilish twist to the tale, gambling was indirectly to cost him even more dearly. But his father taught him also the Genoese skill with money, and saw very soon the commercial potential in his child. He put his son to work good and hard, so hard that it took its toll on Niccolo's health, and seemingly for the rest of his days. Paganini said later that it would be difficult to imagine a stricter father. The relationship became complicated. If the boy failed to practice for long hours, he was beaten and given no food. His mother too saw promise in her child, despite his evident frailty and recurrent illnesses, at least one of which was expected to be fatal. Teresa saw also unmistakable possibilities for social advancement, and claimed to have had a dream, when her boy was 5 years old, of the grandeur that was to come. She saw a theatre in flames, with her son grown tall, playing triumphant music, with Tartini conducting, and competing for the soul of her son with a red devil holding a guitar. Then an angel appeared, and she asked that her boy should become a great violinist, and that his name should become immortal. A sign from the angel indicated that her wish would be granted. Paganini carried this story with him all his life long, and vouched for its authenticity. When his mother died, he said that he lamented that he was not there to close her eyes. But he was not there. Her son Niccolo was, as nearly always, far away, in the service of his demon and the successful pursuit of glory. Teresa Paganini's dream was to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and not least in its suggestions of the diabolical. The violin had been associated with devilry since the time of Tartini, who had dreamed of the devil and composed his Devil's Trill Sonata. Both mother and son knew the story and used it. Soon it was widely believed that Paganini had made a pact with the devil, and the idea became an essential ingredient in the alchemy. It worked in the minds of both his admirers and his detractors, and at every level, from those who had never been to a concert in their lives to the most successful composers, performers, and poets of his time.
The excitement that he caused was so unusual, the magic that he practiced upon the fantasy of his hearers so powerful that they could not satisfy themselves with a natural explanation. Old tales of witches and ghosts came into their minds. They tried to explain the wonder of his playing through his past, to fathom the magic of his genius by invoking the supernatural. They even suggested that he had dedicated his soul to the devil.
To describe him, one needs poetry or fairy tales. There is in his appearance something so demonic that one looks for a glimpse of a cloven hoof or an angel's wing.
He wore a frock coat of dark grey which reached to his heels and gave him an appearance of great height. His long dark hair fell to his shoulders in twisted locks and formed a black frame for his pale, cadaverous face, on which sorrow, genius, and hell had left their ineffaceable stigmata.
Easter Sunday, in the evening I heard Paganini. What ecstasy! In his hands the driest exercises flame up like Pythian pronouncements.
In Paganini's Adagio, I heard the singing of angels. We will not see this fellow's like again.
What a man! What a violin! What an artist! What suffering, what anguish, what torment those 4 strings can express.
The musicians resisted the mythical and diabolical explanations of Paganini's success. They, of course, knew better. But even they were divided, both in their opinions and in their explanations. This provoked a stream of debate and analysis, and prompted the conductor of the Frankfurt Orchestra, Karl Guhr, to publish an account of the differences between Paganini and all other violinists. He identified 6 principal innovations. His method of tuning his instrument. In some works, Paganini raises the pitch of all 4 strings by a semitone, and when he plays on the G string alone, it is tuned a minor third high. This has a surprising and magical effect. It is to be hoped that he will share this secret with the world. His method of bowing. Paganini's unique bowing gives his playing the greatest vitality and variety. His subtle nuances give his singing melodies a sweetness which words cannot express. But the chief difference is his astonishing staccato. He throws his bow on the strings with a whipping action and plays scale passages of incredible rapidity, while the sounds of his violin roll off as smooth as pearls. His practice of combining bowed notes with left-hand pizzicato. This was a device used by the old Italian school, especially in the time of Mestrino, but it has been neglected by the French and German schools. Today, only Paganini uses this technique, and with the greatest success. His use of harmonics. One can say with certainty that much of Paganini's security and clarity on the violin is directly related to his complete mastery and extended use of harmonics. This enables him to play with astonishing ease phrases that would otherwise be quite impossible on the instrument, and he does this with the greatest facility. His compositions for the G string alone. In these, the G string is tuned a minor third high, and sometimes even a major third, while using a much thinner string, and they have won him the greatest celebrity. Paganini's tour de force. I cannot be expected to describe them all. Almost everyone who hears him for the first time is astonished and excited by so much that is new and surprising. Paganini can touch the deepest levels of the soul and perform unprecedented feats with dazzling perfection. The effect is beyond description. Success and money generated more than legend and debate. Jealousy and resentment followed quickly in their train, and envy was to become the bane of Paganini's life. It pursued him relentlessly to the grave and even beyond, while his love of money and his obstinacy fanned the flames, and delivered him again and again into the hands of his detractors. In his battles with the world, which became steadily more serious until the day he died, Paganini was fortunate in having the help of a Genoese lawyer, Luigi Germi, who gave him counsel, took care of his money, and became his most loyal friend and his most devoted correspondent. Unhappily, Paganini did not always follow his friend's advice. In 1814, when he was 32 years old, and already well practiced in escaping from his lovers, he ignored Germi's warnings and resisted the claims of a Genoese tailor, Ferdinando Cavanna, on behalf of his pregnant daughter, Angelina. Paganini was arrested and imprisoned for 8 days, adding fuel to the legend that he had acquired his extraordinary skills through long years in prison for murder. This story haunted him persistently and caused him increasing anguish, because although it did no harm to his quest for gold, it did not at all suit his need for glory and the rising sense of his own importance. Paganini became more and more cautious with women, but in 1824, when he was 42 years old, he began a casual relationship with a soprano, Antonia Bianchi, which was to take an unexpected turn. Just as he began to tire of her, Antonia Bianchi announced that she was pregnant, and on the 23rd of July, 1825, gave birth to a son. Paganini maintained the relationship in the interests of his child, but refused to marry Bianchi, who became increasingly tempestuous and demanding. For Paganini, as usual, the dream had faded. The relationship collapsed into violence. Bianchi threatened to destroy Paganini's violin, and he demanded a separation. From this time on, he reserved his most intimate affection for his son, to whom he gave the names of no less than 3 conquering heroes: Achilles, Cyrus, Alexander. And for many years, Paganini gladly fulfilled the roles of father, mother, and nurse. Achilles became in turn his closest companion, his aide and translator, and his greatest solace in the suffering that was to come. After 3 years of mounting tension, Paganini wrote to Germi, "All is finished with Bianchi. I thought it well to accept her proposal and paid her the sum of 2,000 Milanese scudi. She renounced all claims on me. Here at Carlsbad, I started a cure with the waters, because the people here are wild to hear my violin." After his escape from his father to Lucca at the age of 19, Paganini remained in Italy for the next 27 years, his reputation rising steadily from the moment of his dramatic appearance during the Mass. This brought him an appointment as first violin at the theatre, and news of his successes soon reached Elise Bacciochi, Napoleon's elder sister, whom he had crowned Princess of Lucca and Piombino. Paganini was duly appointed first violin to the court, and not long afterwards captain of the royal bodyguard, on intimate terms with the princess. he was given leave to travel and began to record his adventures. At a concert in Livorno, I ran a nail into my heel and came limping onto the stage, which made the audience laugh. As I was preparing to play, the candles fell out of my music desk, which produced more laughter. Then when I began the concerto, my E string broke, which again provoked laughter. But when they saw me continue on 3 strings, it caused a furore. Paganini took note of the effect and added a new surprise to his repertoire. In time, he would be accused of breaking strings deliberately. Relations with the princess became strained when Paganini seemed to her to be too friendly with her younger and more beautiful sister Pauline, and then appeared at a court concert, resplendent in his uniform as captain of the royal bodyguard. The princess ordered her captain to change into concert dress. Her captain ignored the order. The princess repeated her command. Paganini continued the concert in full regalia, danced with the guests, and then, as he had done before and would do again, took flight to continue his conquest of the Western world. His reputation had long since spread beyond Italy, and he considered travelling further afield. But success had become essential to him, and he waited cautiously for the invitation that he felt he deserved. Eventually, in 1819, when he was 36 years old, it came from the Austrian Prince Metternich, whose daughter had heard Paganini in Rome and been captivated. Paganini resolved to cross the Alps, but illness and caution made him wait 9 years before he did so.
The famous Genoese violinist, the Chevalier Niccolo Paganini, has at last decided to undertake a tour beyond Italy and to dedicate his first performances to Vienna, the city of art.
Paganini arrived early, made sure that his arrival was noted, appeared conspicuously in public, but remained aloof, except towards the prince and princess, whose drawing room was the only one in which he condescended to play. Then he announced a public concert in the Redutensaal for the 29th of March, 1828.
Never has an artist caused such a sensation within our walls as this god of the violin. Never has the public so gladly carried its money to a concert, and never in my memory has the fame of a virtuoso so penetrated to the lowest classes of the population. When we say that in his hands the violin sounds more beautiful and more moving than any human voice, that his glowing soul kindles warmth in every heart, that every singer could learn from him, one still has said nothing that illuminates his playing. That is Paganini. Anyone who has not heard him can have no idea of it. One must hear him and hear him again. Only then can it be believed.
The time was right for the performer who had become the first of the Romantic virtuosi. Paganini rapidly became the focus of a rampant fashion that penetrated all levels of Vienna's social life. His grand tour of Europe had begun, and he had learned a few more tricks of self-promotion. He went on to tour Germany and Poland with equal success, although he did not fare so well in Prague. With his health much improved, he played more than 125 concerts in over 50 cities between 1828 and 1831, and began to make money as no instrumental soloist had ever done before. But as far as money was concerned, this was only the beginning. He became increasingly sure of himself, demanding and eccentric. At his concerts, he would keep the public waiting, often for much too long, then emerge slowly and scrutinize the audience before coming onto the stage in a strangely awkward manner, offer a disconcerting smile that smacked of cynicism, and then sweep his bow to the floor in an imperious gesture as if he were making a salute with a sword. He had learned to build success upon success, and resolved to play in Paris in the certain knowledge that it would be his greatest challenge. Paris claimed to have the most refined school of violin playing in Europe, and more dangerously, valued artistic expression above virtuosity. As usual, the challenge became an obsession, and as usual, Paganini took his time. Paganini had other reasons to delay. He had driven himself too hard, and his health had begun to fail again. He was seriously troubled by a persistent cough, a digestive tract ruined by endless medicines, including mercury for the treatment of syphilis, which destroyed his teeth, and other mysterious maladies which defied diagnosis, but may well have been the symptoms of mercury poisoning. His suffering was, at times, intense. He turned increasingly to quack remedies and consulted every willing doctor who crossed his path. But he continued to drive himself forward, travelled great distances by coach in difficult conditions, and put up in uncomfortable lodgings, sustained by some inner mettle that astonished almost all who came into contact with him. Paganini arrived in Paris with his 6-year-old son on the 24th of February, 1831, and generated the usual tension by declining to play for the king on the grounds that his cough made it quite impossible. He also declined invitations to concerts, but on the 5th of March, and with the help of Rossini, announced his intention to play a gala concert at the Opera House on the 9th, and at double the normal ticket prices. The Opera House was crowded with the most distinguished and brilliant public that Paganini had ever confronted, including Théophile Gautier, Eugène Delacroix, Georges Sand, dressed as a man so that she could sit in the stalls, Rossini, Cherubini and Aubert, Heinrich Heine, and the young Franz Liszt, who was so profoundly impressed that the experience was to become a turning point in his life and career.
It was a divine, a diabolic enthusiasm. I never saw or heard anything to equal it in all my life. The people have all gone crazy. But you should have seen how awkward he was. He swayed back and forth like a drunken man. His own feet got in the way. He kicked out with them, threw his arms in the air, stretched them out towards the wings, and supplicated heaven, earth, and all mankind for help in his great need. He is the most magnificent lout that nature ever invented.
Sell all you possess, pawn everything but go to hear him. This is the most astounding, the most surprising, the most wonderful, the most miraculous, the most triumphant, the most bewildering, the most incredible, the most extraordinary, and the most unexpected thing that ever happened. In a dream, Tartini saw a devil playing a diabolic sonata. That devil was surely Paganini.
Dissenting voices were drowned, and Paganini wrote to Germi. It is impossible to give you any idea of the prodigious triumphs that I have enjoyed in Paris. In a contract made the day before yesterday with Laporte, impresario of the King's Theatre in London, I promised to begin a series of concerts there early next month, and to give no less than 6 in 8 weeks. It is astonishing to see the success of all these Paris concerts, following so closely one upon the other. If only I had come a year ago, I could have made 1 million. From 11 concerts in 6 weeks, Paganini made 158,000 francs. Such a thing had never been done before.
I imagined that his features would bear the stamp of his genius, and that if he was not beautiful, he could not be downright ugly. I was disillusioned. I saw, entering the room, a man with a figure that looked almost twisted, with large ears and a long square face framed in long black hair that fell over his collar in the old directoire style. His nose and mouth matched the rest of his appearance, as did his deep-set eyes that burned with a dark fire. All of this gave a look of the satanic to his whole person. But when he spoke of the violin, he displayed the most vivid enthusiasm. I was enchanted. I no longer thought him ugly. And when I heard the divine sounds of that instrument at the opera, I felt I was transported to another world. In the presence of this magician, I was prepared for anything. Had the devil himself appeared, I should not have been surprised.
But Paris began to resist the magic. Paganini had gone too far, and success brought resentment. Reports of personal meanness began to spread. And instead of ignoring them, as he had done in the past, Paganini became increasingly intransigent. The pace of his life, his ill health, the effects of the medicines, and the burden of his growing importance all contributed to make him nervous and unpredictable. He refused to play at a charity ball, which provoked a spate of attacks in the papers. He made the mistake of issuing public justifications, which made matters worse. And despite donations to charity in an effort to stem the tide, almost everything that he did now seemed to work against him. Even the old legends of his imprisonment and his association with the devil were paraded in public. On the 28th of April, 1831, he left Paris for London. He was said to be looking weaker than ever. Fears were expressed that if he survived the crossing, the English fog would probably put an end to him. After his triumphs in Paris, Paganini was ill prepared for the contrast of London. The city was in political and economic turmoil. He was disturbed by the noise, the weather, and the English, whom he found as foreign to him as he was to them.
The state of the country is still dreadful. A feverish activity about the future universally prevails, for no man can foresee what course events will take.
Paganini, unsettled and unwell, made a series of errors from which his reputation with the English would never recover. But it did not matter to him. He had set his sights on English gold.
Laporte's presumption in doubling the prices of admission to the King's Theatre on the first night of Paganini's performance is one of those extravagancies which could only have entered the head of a foreigner who had beforehand arrived at the happy conviction, moreover, of the infinite gullibility of the English nation. We have had instances enough before in this country of extravagant pretension, yet none of them ever ventured on such an outrageous proceeding as this. The common sense of the majority of the frequenters of the King's Theatre will, we are persuaded, furnish the best remedy for such extortion by causing them to absent themselves till Laporte and his foreign idol are brought to their senses.
The King's Theatre, at the prices demanded by the Italian violinist, would hold the enormous sum of £3,980, or in round numbers, £4,000. A sum which, if properly invested, would give to Signor Paganini and his heirs forever the income of an Italian gentleman, and this for a single performance, the duration whereof could not altogether exceed, in the course of the evening, a single hour.
The protests grew to alarming proportions. Paganini cancelled the concert, saying that he was too ill to play, and wrote to the Times. Accustomed in all the nations of the continent to double the ordinary prices of the theatres where I have given my concerts, and little instructed in the customs of this capital in which I present myself for the first time, I did believe that I could do the same. The concert finally took place on the 3rd of June, 1831, at normal ticket prices. The maestro, remembering the failure of his efforts to check the resentment in Paris, resolved to ignore the controversy and extract as much as he could from a nation that he felt had exploited his beloved Italy.
He is not only the finest player, perhaps, that has ever existed on that instrument, but he forms a class by himself.
To judge him properly, he must be heard. He is the greatest musical wonder, without question, of this or any previous age.
5 days after his first concert, Paganini wrote to Germi, "If you could read some of the English papers, you would see what unparalleled frenzy I aroused among the cold Britons with my first concert at the large Italian opera house. The whole theatre, pit, boxes and gallery, seemed like a sea in tempest. As soon as possible, I shall give you a better account of the money, which is the most important. Everyone says that such a triumph here is unprecedented. I played, and all the malignant slander changed to ineffable praise."
We are slow to swallow mountains, and therefore did not believe all we heard touching the Signor before his arrival. We here retract. Paganini is a solitary man in his art. There is a relation between a unit and a million. There is none between Paganini and his fellow men.
Paganini's music had won the day as usual, but not all the slander changed to praise, and the English press continued to characterize him as a grotesque and unsympathetic figure, despite the enthusiasm of the critics. The maestro was more concerned with other things. He recorded the receipts from his first 6 London concerts as £10,212 and 11 pence. He gave 151 concerts in 12 months, and what he earned in that year would have bought him nearly 5 times his own weight in pure gold. An unimaginable sum, and once again, something that had never been done before. Paganini was celebrating the apex of his career. By the end of his first English tour, Paganini had been travelling constantly for 4 years and already made his fortune. But he was tired and ill and beginning to dream of returning to Italy with his son. He wrote to Germi, "I am not feeling well. The electricity which I experience in producing my magical music does me infinite harm. But being home again and near you for a time will prolong my life. To be honest, I regret that there is a general opinion among all classes that I'm in collusion with the devil, and the papers make too much of my outward appearance, which arouses incredible curiosity. I'm tired and loathe travelling. Achilles is my consolation. When I have a severe coughing spell, the dear boy gets up, helps me, and comforts me with unspeakable affection. May heaven preserve him, and you as well." On his return to Paris in November of 1833, Paganini collapsed with a hemorrhage of the lung and wrote immediately to Germi, "I am so ill that I do not know if I will recover. My lungs are affected. I have had a hemorrhage and do not know what to tell you. I should be happy if you could come to Paris." 3 weeks later he wrote again, "I have recovered. When I scratched my letter to you on the 24th, the doctors gave me only 8 or 10 hours to live. In August I shall come to embrace you without fail, and enjoy the autumn and winter with you." But his resolution did not hold. He could not resist another invitation to play in England. Despite all the signs and his failing health, he ignored Germi's advice yet again. He returned to London, but interest had waned. He was confronted by unfilled houses, and wrote to Germi, admitting that it had been a mistake. He fired a last parting shot at the English. "You pay largely for your own amusements and your own vanity. You made me the fashion. You saw and heard me perform. You listened to me in preference to your Lord Chancellor. You flocked in crowds to see me, and you enabled me to purchase an estate at Parma. You had my face and figure in all the print shops. Your lords invited me to sup, your ladies to tea, and your aldermen to dine. But for this I acknowledge no claim on my gratitude. I supplied your longing for something wonderful, or rather something new. You filled my pockets, and we are quits." Again, and even more unwisely, Paganini postponed his return to Italy, with the idea of marrying Charlotte Watson, the daughter of his London manager. He bought her an extravagant array of jewels in Bond Street, and they planned to meet in Calais. But her father got wind of it and arrived there first. With the help of the British consul and the French police, Mr. Watson escorted his daughter back to England. Paganini returned to Paris, where he felt more at home. But not for long. News of the Watson affair had preceded him, and fed the growing resentment at his avarice and envy at his success. What he encountered now was worse than anything that he had endured in England. His happy relationship with his public had disappeared almost entirely, and even the critics joined in the game. Their leader, Jules Janin, published a taunt in the Journal of Debates.
How does it happen that Paganini has now been in Paris all of a week incognito, and no one has yet asked him to play the prayer from Moses for the 20th time? I know an admirable, even an infallible way for him to regain universal admiration and respect. He need only take his violin any evening this week and go to any theatre he pleases and play there anything he likes for the benefit of the unfortunate workmen of Saint-Étienne. If he does this, he will be the most famous musician in the world.
Paganini, who was ill and felt that he had suffered enough at the hands of the press, replied immediately. The extraordinary method adopted by your witty feuilletonist to induce me to give a concert for the benefit of the poor compels me to reply to this attack. For more than 3 months I have given no concert in France. My debilitated health requires the greatest rest, and I am about to return to Genoa, my native place, where I shall remain all the time requisite for my re-establishment. I have given 2 concerts in Paris for the benefit of the poor. Who has the right of doubting that I should have pleasure in giving a 3rd? I trust that you will give place to these lines in your estimable journal. The paper did not accord him that courtesy, and the letter was not published, although it did appear in the London Times. Paganini, realizing that his tormentor would deny him a public hearing, and in any case always have the last word, retreated in silence to Genoa. He was tired and sick at heart. He arrived in Genoa early in October 1834. His grand tour beyond the Alps had lasted a little over 6.5 years. He had returned to Italy the most applauded soloist of his time, and by an astonishing margin the most wealthy. At his first concert in Genoa, the city of his birth, he was greeted with a wave of public affection that overwhelmed him. It should have been his moment of greatest triumph, but in fact, it marked the beginning of the end. He was confronted with the dual nightmare of waning powers and intractable, painful illness. He said, "I came back home to see my friends and regain my health, then once more to face the world. I'm going to and must get well." But fate decreed otherwise. He was haunted by a sense of futility that was something new to him. Then, to the surprise of all who knew him, he showed that his irrepressible optimism was still capable of being fired. He was invited by Napoleon's widow, the Archduchess Marie-Louise, to reform the court orchestra at Parma, and he saw the fulfillment of a lifelong dream, the creation of the finest orchestra in Italy, and under royal patronage. Marie-Louise knighted him and promised that his every proposal would be adopted. Paganini plunged into the task with a commitment and vigor that astonished everyone involved. But he took the Archduchess too literally at her word, behaved high-handedly, and provoked disputes with her courtiers. His dreams of a new era were quickly crushed in a web of intrigue, and as he had done before, he slipped away to preserve his dignity. The electricity which I experience in producing my magical music does me infinite harm. But being home again and near you for a time will prolong my life. I'm going to and must get well. As usual, Paganini turned to his optimism for consolation, with a lingering thought for Charlotte Watson, who had gone to America with her father. And as usual in difficult moments, he wrote to Jeremy. I still want to spend a winter in Russia, and also to go to America. Besides the pleasure of visiting new cities, 1,000,000 scudi more with a sympathetic girl at my side would be nothing to despise. His body was failing, and syphilis was beginning to affect his mind. His mood swung rapidly between dejection and elation with delusions of grandeur. He consulted more doctors and looked for a new enterprise to lift his spirits. It was not long in coming. He was invited to take shares in a project to build a casino in Paris, to be named the Casino Paganini. He invested heavily, but was unable to appear at the opening because of his illness and paralysis of the larynx, which had almost entirely destroyed his voice. The gaming license was refused, an illegal concert organized, and the casino was closed by the authorities. A flurry of lawsuits followed. One of the directors was imprisoned, and the others sued Paganini for damages. With his usual optimism, and convinced that they had no case against him, Paganini brought a counteraction. He lost the case, and wrote to his lawyer. I have just this moment learned that a verdict has been brought against me by the civil court, condemning me to pay 20,000 francs in damages. As this strange sentence is incomprehensible to me, I must ask you to explain the reasons for it. Paganini appealed, and to the astonishment of his lawyer, he lost again.
I am so shocked, so grieved, that I do not know if I shall have the strength to tell you what has happened. The court has increased the damages to the exorbitant sum of 50,000 francs. To sum up, the court has passed judgment upon you as a man to whom public opinion ascribes a capricious and eccentric character, and it wanted to strike at a man who is reputedly worth several millions.
Paganini now understood only too well, and to make it more painful, he knew that his time was running out. But he still had one more grand surprise for the world. Berlioz had suffered a crippling failure with his opera Benvenuto Cellini. In the words of Jules Janin, one need only to look at Berlioz to recognize his fearful dejection. This is no longer the intrepid Titan, but a defeated man. Paganini then attended a performance of Harold in Italy on the 16th of December 1838, and what happened was to touch all who witnessed it, confound his adversaries, and even convert some of his fiercest critics.
The concert was just over. I was in a profuse perspiration and trembling with exhaustion, when Paganini, followed by his son Achilles, came up to me at the orchestra door, gesticulating violently. No one could even guess at what he was saying. He made a sign to the child, who got up on a chair, put his ear close to his father's mouth, and listened intently. Achilles then got down, and turning to me said, "My father wants me to tell you, sir, that he has never in his life been so impressed at a concert, that your music has greatly affected him, and that if he did not restrain himself, he should go down on his knees to thank you." I made a movement of incredulous embarrassment at these strange words, but Paganini took my arm and rattled out, "Yes, yes," with what little voice he had left, dragged me onto the stage, knelt down, and kissed my hand. I cannot describe my astonishment.
2 days later, Paganini wrote to Berlioz with a promissory note for the extraordinary sum of 20,000 francs.
I hurried to the Neoterme, where Paganini was then living. I was told that he was alone in the billiard room. I went in, and we embraced without a word. After some minutes, as I was stammering out I know not what in the way of thanks, Paganini, whom I was able to understand in the empty room, cut me short with these words: "Do not speak of it. Not another word. You will never know how your music has affected me."
Nothing was more cruel, more unjust, more pitiless, I confess it to my shame, than my anger. I was wrong in form, and I was wrong in substance. But public opinion was with me, and everybody repudiates an avaricious artist. Today, I admit that the artist was in the right. He considered it a shame to give away for nothing the almost divine fruits of an art that had cost him so much, a talent that he felt, without openly admitting it, was ebbing away little by little with his life. He tried in vain to answer me. He only succeeded in making me more angry than ever, and increased the plaudits of the gallery. And so he relapsed into silence. But he awaited the day of his revenge, and when at last that day came, he showed us how a great artist avenges himself. He avenged himself in the manner of a king of the house of Valois.
Paganini had made his last grand gesture. He continued to cherish the waning hope of recovery, but died in Nice, suffering pitifully from multiple illnesses, less than a year and a half later, on the 27th of May, 1840. He was 57 years old. But the world had not finished with Niccolo Paganini. His reputation pursued him even beyond his own death, and he was denied a Catholic burial. An unsuccessful battle with the Bishop of Nice ensued. His body was embalmed and ferried back and forth by his friends for 2 years before being buried unofficially on a private estate. It was then exhumed 3 times before being laid to rest in the Parma cemetery 36 years later, in 1876. It was then exhumed yet again to be reburied in the new Parma cemetery a further 20 years later, in 1896. What did he achieve in his 57 restless years? He cherished his gift and polished it with intelligence, enthusiasm, and tireless hard work. He composed a great range of original and memorable music. He changed violin playing decisively and he created the age of the romantic virtuoso. He fulfilled his mother's dream and wrote his own page in the history of Western music. But parental fanaticism and a suspicious nature made him greedy for success, for gold, and for women. And so everything became a battle. He brought the gift of music to hundreds of thousands of people. But he was cavalier and showed little respect for those who so responded to his miraculous gift and conferred on him such enormous privilege. To make matters worse, he made himself extremely rich. And so the world became envious, and his attitude exacerbated the envy. Paganini professed indifference and went on to create one of the most enduring legends in all of music. But he used his legend, and the world has not forgotten that. And yet, through all of it, he served his demon with commitment and dedication, despite appalling suffering. And in so doing, he changed the world. The world has not forgotten that either.